who are joining us. Again, welcome back. This month we have two wonderful special guests, one of which who is a friend of mine, and she is sitting up here with me. And then another who I will introduce in just a minute. But before we get started with our discussion of This Is Your Mind on Plants, I want to go ahead and give a couple shout outs to our wonderful partners. Obviously, Indiana Sciences, which, if you were at the Indiana State House for the eclipse, you got to hang out with us a little extra this month. By the way, hope you guys got out to enjoy the eclipse. It took me, I think, until 5 minutes ago talking to Rufus to realize that the eclipse happened this month. Like, the eclipse happened a few weeks ago. I thought it was last year. I did not realize only like 3.5 weeks have gone by. That is crazy. But so I hope you guys got out to go to the eclipse. Did anybody go to IMS? Did anybody go to the NASA event at the track? No? Did everyone just kind of hang out in their front yard? Yeah. Same. Yeah. Oh, yeah. Yeah. That's true. The benefit to be, one, not having to deal with the IMS traffic. Not doing that. And I mean, it was so fun to like watch my neighbors come out and all of us kind of like have a moment together. Oh, it was so much fun. But I still can't believe that was 3 weeks ago. And so now we're at the end of the month, and I want to go ahead and thank Indiana Sciences once again for all of the programming you do here for Books, Moves, and Brains and across our community. And I want to give Sam a quick shout out for Indiana Humanities, because they, along with this book club, do a lot of other really awesome programming that if you're not following them on social media, highly recommend, so that you can keep up with that and all the cool stuff they're doing. But Sam, could you give us like a rundown of maybe a couple events that you guys have coming up?
I'd be happy to. Can you all hear me okay?
I can.
That'll do. So yeah, I just wanted to give a quick shout out that our campfire season just started. So if you're like, I love the science stuff inside, but I would like to do the science stuff outside as well, you can join us on one of our hikes coming up. Matt was there recently, and we went to a cave. It was really fun down in Bloomington. And here maybe at Falls of the Ohio State Park. So,
Ooh.
schedule's up on our website right now. If you have any questions, come flag them down. We'll be doing a different book discussion at the end of May. I think some of you that are regulars here at Books, Moves, and Brains, one, thank you for all your support over the years. Two, have seen us partner with Grand Balloon before with the Kurt Vonnegut experience.
I love it.
Down at IU Bloomington every year. And as we've partnered with them before, they usually do science books. So this year is a book that's also focused on the Watergate scandal. And try as we might, we could not quite find a science book. Watergate, except maybe like the technology behind how the microphones work and that's a little bit of So because Vonnegut and IU folks talking about Vonnegut are going to more civics lens, we figured we would change up the branding for that one a little bit. So this will be just a community book discussion, but I think you all are more than welcome to come on over. So that'll be, I think it's the Wednesday after our May Books, Moves, and Brains, so the last Wednesday.
Yeah.
In May, we'll be over at the Kurt Vonnegut Library. They've been very kind to host us that night. If you want to come over there and talk about some Kurt and some Nixon, feel free to join us that night. Al, can you remember what the May book is off the top of your head?
I believe it's Unmasking AI. Yeah. Best friend. Besties. Yeah. No, yeah. If you've never been out for one of their campfire walk and talks, highly recommend. They have incredible speakers, and it's so much fun. And also the Grand Falloon Festival schedule is out. If you go every year, you're interested in the musical lineup. Carl Bernstein is going to be speaking in Bloomington, which is going to be rad. It's going to be super popular. So anyway, so many things. Spring is in bloom, pun intended, for the plant book. And so with that, and lastly, finally, of all of Indiana Humanities, Indiana Sciences, as always, we have to thank our Indiana Public Libraries who help make these books available for everybody and who need our support now more than ever. Always. Love our librarians. And with that, I want to go ahead and introduce our second guest speaker who will be leading our discussion, also a friend of mine, Elizabeth Fusco. Come here. You can come here. You're going to be sitting here. And Elizabeth, go ahead and introduce yourself, and then Karina, introduce yourself, and you guys can get started talking on this book, because I have a lot of questions.
All right, thanks, Allison. Hi, everybody. My name's Elizabeth. I'm a PhD candidate at IU School of Medicine studying microbiology and immunology. I'm not a plant scientist. I study the immune response to malaria, but I'm really excited to be here tonight and talk about this book.
And I guess I'll go now. I'm Karina Collins. I am, currently I work with Allison at Eli Lilly and Company, which doesn't necessarily have to do with plants, but I have had kind of a windy career path. And so in a slightly former life, I got my PhD in biochemistry, but my focus was on plant immunity, actually. So maybe we could talk about that later. Plants have an immune system, spoiler alert. So if you want to know more about that, please feel free to ask me. And I've had kind of a pretty traditional academic path. I got my PhD in Missouri, which is where I'm from originally. Spent some time in Wisconsin, went back to Missouri, and now I'm here in Indiana. I've had a couple of teaching positions, most recently at Marian University here in Indianapolis, where I taught biochemistry, had a research lab with undergraduate students, and for a variety of reasons decided to kind of take a career pivot, which is how I ended up at Lilly. So also, if you want to know more about that, let me know. But I'm excited to talk about plants, which is still very much a passion project of mine, and something that I enjoy continuing to stay engaged with and learn more about.
So let's
Yes.
start with a very important question. What's your favorite type of plant?
My favorite type of plant. This is probably, and I don't know if this is a popular or unpopular opinion, but my favorite types of plants are the scrappy plants. The plant I have the most experience with is a plant called Arabidopsis thaliana. That's its scientific name. You've probably all encountered this plant and not known it, but if you walk along the sidewalk or if you walk anywhere in the Midwest, you see it growing in concrete in cracks. It's a weed. It's most closely related to mustard, actually, but it's a pretty scrappy little weed. But I would say probably one of the most studied plants. We use it a lot for scientific research. It's sort of like the mouse of the plant world. If you study a mouse to understand more about maybe human physiology, you would use Arabidopsis to understand more kind of broadly about the plant world. So I wouldn't say that's necessarily my favorite plant. I think my favorite plants, though, are the maybe like, I don't know, scrappy plants like succulents and things like that don't look like they should survive where they do, and yet somehow still do, like Arabidopsis growing on the sidewalk. So,
Do you have like a big succulent or like scrappy plant garden at home?
Yes, we do have a lot of succulents. We have kind of a variety of different succulents and cacti and things like that. Probably not as many as I should, given how much I like them. We also have a lot of regular house plants that grow pretty normally, but yeah, I also have to say, you asked me a very broad question. I have many answers
Okay.
to. But I do also kind of like the weird plants. We actually, as a very kind wedding gift from some friends, were gifted a collection of carnivorous plants. So we also have I don't know all their names, but we do have a collection of carnivorous plants. Those are really hard to take care of, though. So we've had like 50-50 luck on keeping those alive. But they just look weird. They are weird. They have like really strange physiology. So I like those ones too.
Do you mind because carnivorous plants are so cool. They were something I was like obsessed with when I was younger. Do you mind expanding a little bit on carnivorous plants
Sure.
and like how they're a little bit different from like the plants we might typically think of?
Sure. So I think one of the things that I found most interesting and weirdly enough, like most intriguing about why they're so hard to take care of, because they're adapted to basically eat insects. I'm going to anthropomorphize them for a minute, but they grow best in very nutrient poor soil. So you can accidentally kill them just by fertilizing them. So you have to get like very sandy, you have to add a lot of like perlite and things to their soil so that it's very just not a whole lot in it. I think what we had the most success with actually with those was like a mixture of a cactus soil, extra perlite, and just like straight up sphagnum moss, and they did okay. And then they kind of like, had their insects that they got on their own time. So, yeah.
So would you say then that you have a garden of strange and unusual plants?
I think that's fair to say. In the house, we have a collection of strange and unusual plants. Outside the house, we try and have as many native plants as we can. So we've got a pretty big native garden, but yeah.
Speaking of strange and unusual plants, this book focuses a lot on Michael's garden, growing psychoactive plants, specifically his work growing poppies in his garden and eventually trying to grow some hallucinogenic plants. Do you know much about psychoactive plants?
I will be honest, I don't know a whole lot about them. I know poppies actually are supposed to be relatively easy to grow. I've not actually tried to grow them. We have some neighbors though who I'm 95% sure are growing poppies in their yard. They have a really expansive front garden and they're beautiful. We walk past them every day and I think they look really beautiful. But I don't really think that because they're plants that make psychoactive substances that they're necessarily more or less easy to grow than other plants.
So a large portion of this book is him talking about like the cultivation of poppies and how it's illegal in the United States. And he spent a long time talking about how he knew he was breaking the law by growing these poppies. But many people probably don't because it's so easy to just get the seeds. The seed companies don't say anything about it when you go to purchase them.
Mhm.
Are there other plants that you know of that are like that?
Ooh, that's a really good question. It's an interesting question because I think a lot of times, people sometimes, I'm going to generalize a little bit, but general public doesn't always have a great understanding of where certain things come from, especially if it's a plant-derived item or if it's a plant-derived substance. And so I'm sure that there are many people who, appreciate the look of poppies, buy the poppy seeds because they're really beautiful plants just without having the connection. So let me think about some other plants that are like, I think actually one of the most interesting things, I think there are a lot of plants out there that people cultivate or keep in their homes because they're really beautiful. So I'm thinking more about houseplants like poinsettias, right? Or that one maybe is a little bit more known. But anything in the nightshade family, or which includes a lot of tomatoes and things like that. There's some, I forget the name, but there's a really common plant I see in people's gardens. Anything in the nightshade family is pretty toxic to most animals. So I think so my answer is kind of not really about like whether or not people are cultivating these plants without knowing they have an effect on humans. There are a lot of plants people cultivate that can actually have pretty negative effects on other creatures maybe that are in the environment. Just because they look pretty.
Mm-hmm.
Also, a lot of house plants are actually really toxic to cats. Lilies, ZZ plants, which a lot of people have those. They're all pretty toxic. So I think maybe people are unaware of some of those things when they get those plants.
I think so too. Like every year I see the same posts going around about lilies around Easter time and how toxic they are for cats. I grew up with cats, and I never understood growing up why my mom didn't want to have flowers in the house.
Yeah.
Because the cats would chew on them, but I thought it was just because she was annoyed that they were chewing on the plants and she was losing her flowers. But like now that I've gotten older, I'm like, oh, that's dangerous. That's going to kill my cat. That's going to kill my cat.
She didn't want your plants or cat to die. Yeah.
And now every time I bring a new plant to my house, I bring it in and then I'm like, oh, wait, I got to Google whether this is safe or not to have it on my cat because he will chew on it if he thinks I'm not giving him enough attention.
Well, it's funny you said that because you would think as a plant scientist, right, or former plant scientist, my husband is a current plant scientist, that we would be a little bit more on top of this. But we actually just this weekend went to Menards to get some more like plants for our yard and got a plant called Scotch broom because it looked really, again, I like weird plants. It looks wild. It looks kind of like a weird pea bush and it's got these really weird red flowers. And I was like, oh, that's really cool. We should put this in the garden. It looks really interesting. And my husband was like, okay. sound okay, whatever. You know, we got it home and then looked up more about this plant. It is incredibly invasive and it spreads like nobody's business. And we didn't realize that until after we planted it. So now we're like, should we take it out? What do we need to do? So even I've succumbed to this in my own house. So I think it's hard. I don't know. I think it also kind of speaks to the incredible variety of plants that are out there, right? There's so many different plants that do so many different things. It's kind of hard sometimes to know all of the things about them.
Yeah, and there's so many different plants out there, and Michael knew that growing these species of poppies was illegal, and he still chose to grow them and write an article about them, especially after just seeing what had happened to somebody else, and I think a neighboring state really close to him who was arrested for his like growth and cultivation of poppies. I was wondering if you had any thoughts on kind of that whole story.
I think it's an interesting story. I think that one of the points I think that comes up in the book a lot is about the intent of growing these plants, right? That's the piece that is illegal, the intent to grow them for the sake of, you know, using them for their psychoactive properties. But it's also kind of wild to me to think that just growing a plant would ever be illegal. I don't know. I think there's just, you know, there's so many people who maybe are like we were just saying, growing them without knowing necessarily what they are or what they have. So to have that particular plant become kind of the enemy when it's the I don't know, kind of the human actions that are the illegal part is interesting to me. I'm not necessarily a legal expert, so I don't know. I'm sure, I don't know, I can't come up with an articulate legal argument about that, but it seems wild to criminalize growing the plants.
Yeah, I agree.
Yeah, I don't know.
Something that I did think was really interesting in the book, though, was when he was kind of talking about all of this and how he was like kind of recounting how he was writing this article about growing poppies for one of the magazines he used to work for, how he was shocked that writing about him growing illegal poppies, harvesting opium from them, and writing a recipe to brew opium tea was going to get him in legal trouble.
Right, yeah. Well, I after like accepting the invitation to come here and reading the book and everything, I was worried too just about Googling. I was Googling a lot about how plants make the, right, opium is what we call the drug, but the molecule that they're making is actually morphine and a collection of other molecules. And I was Googling a lot about their biosynthesis and also very concerned that I was just added to some list.
Am I going to get on some kind of list? Yeah.
I probably am. So. Yeah.
But like kind of speaking of controversy, I heard that there's a lot of controversy kind of surrounding Michael Pollan and like his views and like his writings. Would you mind touching on that a little bit?
I think particularly in the plant science community, there's a little bit of, I don't know if controversy is quite the right word, but people get their hackles up a little bit about him just because, he's a great, I think he's a good writer. His books are really engaging. And he really, he went through all the trouble of growing the plants. Like he was very hands-on about what he was writing about. But all of his books, I think, have, are very adjacent to plants or are very adjacent kind of to the science of the plants. But that's not really what he's writing about. He's really writing about, I think, the human experience with the plants. And there's a lot of value, I think, in contemplating our relationship with plants and how plants have shaped history, right, and legal matters and things like that. But he doesn't give a whole lot of credit to the plants themselves. Like I was just saying, like poppies. I think even just the way he talks about what the plants are making. I've also listened to interviews with him, and he does this in the interviews too. He talks about the opium and mescaline and things like that. But the opium is, if you wanted to be scientifically accurate, right, it's actually morphine and codeine, and I forgot the other one. But so he's not, I feel like he doesn't necessarily give the plants their due, their credit for the things that they're doing. It's a very human, his books are very human-centric instead of plant-centric. And I think there is a lot of movement. I'm not sure if that's quite right, the right word, but there's a lot of people who study plants, who are engaged in plant science, who are trying to get away from that, and actually have people think about plants for the sake of being plants, and think about the incredible things that they're kind of doing on their own that don't have to do with humans. Because plants aren't making these things for us, right? They are making them for themselves. These are all defense chemicals. So the plants aren't making them with us in mind. So.
Yeah. And kind of like what you touched on already, a lot of this book is about what Michael has learned and his experiences
Right.
dealing with the plants. So I
Mhm.
guess a question that I have for you and a question that I'm going to pose to all of you that you can discuss at your tables for about 10 minutes is, what do you think we can learn from plants? And then we'll come back and discuss as a group in about 10 minutes. Does that sound good with everybody? Yeah, okay. Me? Okay. Oh. Okay. Oh, sure.
Okay.
Into it. Okay.
What we do during this section is there's a live stream going, so y'all just want to like quickly answer the question.
Oh, yeah.
yourself, grab a drink as needed, and then
Sure.
we'll go.
Sure.
Yeah.
Cool.
Awesome.
I know you were excited about this question, so I want to make sure that we got to it.
I think, and something I'll share maybe with the rest of the group is there's a really great book by a really well-known plant scientist, Rhonda Montgomery, called Lessons from Plants or Lessons in Plants. Now I can't quite remember the title. And she just does this incredible deep dive into things we can learn from plants that are grounded kind of in the science behind the things plants are doing. And I think one of my favorite parts of that book that I've thought a lot about is actually is that we can learn like sort of stillness and kind of some kind of I forget exactly how it's phrased in the book, but sort of some quiet contemplation about our actions and our lives and things like that, and also resilience. I think those are probably the two biggest things. Kind of quiet contemplation, but also resilience, right? Plants are able to grow in all environments under all sorts of different conditions, and for the most part, they do okay, right? And that's because they're really resilient organisms. So, yeah. What about you?
I definitely agree with you on like the stillness part, because like when I think of plants, I tend to think of like peace, tranquility,
yeah.
like
Those are great adjectives.
silence almost, even though I know plants can talk to each other.
Yeah.
But and that's like, I feel like I get so busy sometimes and I'm doing so many things. I'm getting a little bit overwhelmed and I need to like stop and be like, no, let's be a little bit more like a plant. Like let's get rooted. Like let's
rooted.
be
That's a
in
good one too.
ourselves
Yeah.
and just like exist. And like that's okay to be like that. So I think that's something I can and I do, and I need to continue to keep
Yes.
learning from plants.
I think that's a great answer.
I like
That's
your
really
point
good.
about resiliency too.
Yeah.
'Cause so many plants, like I think about mint.
Oh yeah.
you
will grow
literally
anywhere.
cut it all the way down. You've ripped it out of the ground. There's like one little piece of root left and it grows right back
Yeah,
again.
exactly.
Except I can still manage to kill mint in my apartment. So I don't know if this is about me.
Yeah. No, it's true though. Like you can, I mean, even I don't know. Like if you just look outside, right? All that there's grass out there. I mean, it's not probably the most exciting plant, right? But
But it's resilient.
it's living right next to the road. There's cars driving by all the time. It's hot, with the asphalt so close. It's probably even hotter, and it's
Still
thriving.
found a
It's
way to
doing its thing.
thrive, yeah.
Exactly. So yeah, I think that also kind of goes back to my like love of scrappy, weird plants that find a way to survive. So
I love your love
Yeah.
of scrappy
thank you.
plants.
thank you.
I feel like we went through probably like as a people a phase, I guess about 10 years ago, where everybody was obsessed with succulents.
I know,
Like, do
right?
you remember that?
Yeah, I do. I don't know what happened though. Like succulents and air plants. I'm looking at that spider plant over there, and it's making me think about like
Those are super
air
resilient
plants.
too.
Yeah, everybody really likes those. And then I don't know if it doesn't seem like people are as interested anymore. Maybe that was like a pandemic thing.
I still have some of
Do
my
you?
succulents and cactuses
Oh.
from high school.
Oh my gosh,
So
that's
from
impressive.
2017.
That's
No, sorry, not 20. That would have been college. 2014.
that's amazing that they've lived that long.
I
That's
forget.
awesome.
Honestly, I forget about them. They get watered like once a year.
See, I think people overwater their houseplants. So like if you just forget about them a little, not too much. You can't like
Mhm.
forget about them too much, but you have
The-
to forget about them a little
The
bit.
plants that I actually like tried to grow inside and have a watering like regimen for, they always died.
Yeah.
So yeah, maybe I should just neglect all of my plants. I have a hydro garden right now.
awesome.
that I, like, try to
one of
grow-
those tower like hydro garden, or is it like
It's a like a
Okay,
panel type
okay,
one
yeah.
that I'm like trying to grow like herbs in and
oh,
stuff.
that's so fun.
That's been great for me because I don't have to do
Nice.
anything except when
Just
it
let 'em
yells
go.
at me. Then I gotta put
Does
the
it
water.
tell
in.
you when
It-
you like it's low?
It
or
flashes red,
Oh,
and
okay.
then if I put it off for long enough, the
Mhm.
gears start grinding
Yeah.
against each other, and it
Oh,
screams.
That's good. That's a nice reminder.
Yeah.
That's awesome. That's very cool. Very cool. How far are you in your PhD?
I'm finishing my fourth year.
Okay,
I should
exciting.
hopefully be defending next spring.
Nice.
Yeah.
Is that how you know Allison?
Yeah, me and
Yeah.
Allison actually went to college together.
Yeah. Oh, in Florida?
Yeah.
Oh, how'd you end up here?
Because of her.
Oh my gosh!
Yeah.
Wow, that's so cool. Okay.
Yeah, because she got her PhD at IU, and we had the same major. We both
Okay.
majored in microbiology
Oh,
in
awesome.
undergrad,
Mhm.
and so she was like, "You should apply here. You're gonna love it. It's a great program."
Oh,
and I'm like,
awesome.
"Okay, yeah, sure." And I applied, and I came from like the recruitment weekend, and I fell in love.
Yeah,
It's
that's
like,
awesome.
yeah. And Allison has continued to like be like a friend and a mentor to
Yeah.
me once I got here.
Yeah, she's
Yeah,
great. That's
she's
awesome.
wonderful.
Oh, I'm so glad that worked out for you. That's really exciting. Are you in a different department now than she was in
Yeah,
grad school?
because she was in anatomy and cell biology,
Okay,
and I'm in
okay.
microimmuno.
Okay, that makes sense. That makes
Which
sense.
I would love to hear more about the
Yes.
immune system of
We should talk
plants
about
later.
that. Yeah, we should totally talk about it. That was actually like what my dissertation's on, so I
Oh, that's
probably
awesome.
know like the most about.
And that's
Um,
something we can learn. I can learn from plants.
Oh
is I
yeah,
can learn about their immune
exactly.
system.
Oh my gosh, full circle moment. I love
I
it.
find the like perfect therapy for malaria where people will never get it again by studying the plant immune
You
system.
might. You never know.
Come
I
up
will
with
say-
the next vaccine.
You might. You never know. Well, people were actually. I think there was a lot of work during early days of COVID. People were trying to develop vaccines in tobacco because I don't know when there is less of a chance of cross reactivity, right, with
Mhm.
humans and plants. So
Yeah.
I don't think they. I mean, obviously they didn't make it that far. There's not one on the market from tobacco, but I think there's a lot of efforts to try and make. I think there's actually a group also trying to make insulin from.
I think I've
or-
heard of that.
Yeah, from tobacco probably too. Tobacco is a really good plant to like mass produce, especially like biologics, like proteins or mRNA from. So it's helpful for that. I know what I was going to say before though. Just a spoiler, I guess. The plant. So the immune system of plants is actually they have toll-like receptor. Well,
Okay.
they're not called toll-like receptors, but they're analogous to toll-like
Mhm.
receptors. So yeah.
So is it more
It's a
of like an
spoiler.
innate like immune system?
Isn't well. There's actually a lot of work being done now. I would say for a long time the prevailing view was that it was strictly an innate immune system. Excuse me.
You gotta take a drink.
I'm a little short, so reaching down that far is.
I know I'm a little short. When I sat down, the microphone was like up here. Allison is much taller than me.
But plants do have. Plants do have like phloem, so they don't have like a circulatory system where they can make antibodies and produce them, but they have phloem, and so they can send molecules around. It's time to go.
Is that what she's saying? It's only been 8 minutes.
Oh, it has it.
Yeah, I've been checking my watch.
Okay. What? Rufus. Oh. Maybe he was. Oh. Okay. I don't know how to turn these on. Okay.
So we have to wait for him to come back anyways.
Okay.
It gives me a second to I already
Oh, yeah.
forgot everything.
No, you're fine.
I think
I think is wild to me.
After this, we might like transition to more of the caffeine stuff.
Okay. Yeah. Actually, yeah, and I have. I know a little bit more about
caffeine.
well, sort of. So I have more thoughts about that too. So yeah.
We'll probably start with like kind of like this. Not exactly that.
Yeah.
We're good. Yeah. All right. Is everybody ready to come back and talk about what we discussed at our tables? Would anybody like to share to start off with?
The what? The Calvin cycle? Wait, what did you say he remembered? The Cal? Oh, that you killed a cactus. I got really excited because I thought you said the Calvin cycle, which is part of photosynthesis, and I got real excited. I was like, if you knew that, incredible. I was hearing what I wanted to hear. Close. Oh no. Yep.
So, Allison, what do you have against cactuses? Would anybody else like to share? If you do, just feel free to raise your hand and Allison will bring the mic.
That was my answer too. So you win, I don't know, a gold star or something. Oh yeah, he just asked me to repeat what the audience is saying. So I'll just repeat that she was commenting on what she's learned from plants is about their resiliency because they can live right in very nutrient poor areas. Or in the example in the book was Michael was talking about the San Pedro cactus and how you can chop parts of it off and it survives.
Since you also talked about resiliency, would you like to expand on your thoughts with it too?
Oh, sure. I just think that, plants are incredibly, the scientific word for kind of what makes plants unique in that regard is called phenotypic plasticity, right? You can have two plants that are, have two seeds, right, that are probably genetically relatively similar to each other, put them in very different environments, and they will first of all, they're going to adapt to survive in those environments, which is pretty incredible. For the most part, at least, they'll adapt. And then the other really cool thing about that is that those two plants in those two environments, if you take them out of those environments after the same amount of time, they're probably going to look really different from one another, right? Plants that don't have enough sunlight grow towards the sunlight. You've all probably seen that, like in your houseplants, if they have legs, people call it that. They're trying to get what they need, even without being able to walk, right, or get around. So, I think plants are just incredible at adapting to their environments.
Would anybody else like to share what they talked about at their table?
Yeah.
Allison's coming.
I think just the general area is the fascinating is understanding the genetics of plants, which is way behind that of other organisms. I mean, like Barbara
McClintock. Mm-hmm.
et cetera, et cetera. I find that fascinating. Or
I also love that answer. No, I think it's true. I think plants are kind of overlooked a little bit sometimes, right? Because I don't know, I keep looking at these spider plants over here, but they're just kind of living their life. They're hanging out. They're not like moving necessarily. So we don't necessarily think about them all the time, but there's so much we can learn because again, kind of to your point, Sarah, like they're so vast. There's so many different plants and their genetics are so diverse too. There's a lot that we can learn that we've actually learned first in plants that we later kind of discovered in animals. So there's a lot of interesting things there.
And we were also just kind of talking
Oh,
a little
yeah.
bit more about the plant immune system
Mhm.
and like how much can we learn about the human immune system by studying the plant immune system, like similarities and differences and stuff. I think that's really cool.
Yeah, I think at the fundamental kind of cellular level, right, we're really quite similar to plants, minus that they can photosynthesize. But a lot of our parts, right, are the same as the parts in plants, which is also kind of cool. We're not that different.
Mm-hmm.
I think there's like that makes me think of this meme I've seen around that I don't think is quite accurate. There's like a picture of a banana, and it's something like you have 95% of your DNA is the same as this banana. And I mean, I don't know about the actual percentage, but it's still pretty high.
I remember learning that in high school biology.
see?
Yeah.
We're all eukaryotes. So we're all very similar.
So kind of transitioning a little bit now to the second section of the book, they mainly focus on caffeine in this section. And a big part of what Michael was talking about here was like kind of the hold that caffeine has on a lot of our lives and how it really impacts like our ability to function, especially like if you're someone who drinks coffee or tea
Mhm.
every day, you get to this point where you need it to wake up and kind of have a productive day. And I was wondering if you could talk a little bit more to the science behind that.
Yeah, I think that was an interesting part of the book too. His own little experiment on himself, right, to see if he can shake his caffeine addiction as someone who is highly also addicted to caffeine. I think that was an interesting part of the book because, again, my thoughts are a little bit biased. I think it's probably clear at this point. But I agree. Again, I think caffeine has this addictive quality, right? Like other compounds. But in some ways, I think he kind of makes it out like caffeine is, or that the plants are somehow a villain in this kind of story that where we have this dependency on caffeine. But again, I think that's a very human kind of focus on it.
Yeah. And I think we kind of have to remember that a lot of what plants do and the substances that they make, they're not for us.
Right.
They're for them.
Yeah.
So I was just talking to one of my friends about this yesterday, and like maybe he was wrong about this, but what he told me was that like with a lot of caffeine producing plants, one of their reasons for making caffeine was because it helped attract pollinators, and the pollinators want to come back because they kind of get that dopamine
that's
hit from the
interesting. Okay.
caffeine. But we have kind of taken over, and now we think those plants are for us.
Right.
And like, yeah, kind of like demonizing them for having such a hold on us.
Right.
But it's not about us. It's about them and their survival.
Yeah, exactly. I think that's really interesting. I think the other thing that's kind of interesting to keep in mind about those sorts of topics is just like we're not that different from plants in a lot of ways, we're not that different from insects too. And so, I mean, some of the neural effects, right, that these chemicals have on insects happen to us too because we also have brains. I mean, they're very different than an insect brain, but I don't know. I think that's kind of an interesting, we've sort of totally taken it and adapted it in a very different way, but.
And that just reminded me of when he talks about the opium tea and he talks about, or just coffee in general. And then when he eventually talks about consuming the mescaline, we're like taking these parts of the plants that they don't actually want to be consumed, and they usually taste so bitter.
Yeah.
But we just kind of deal with it because we want the effects, even though that's supposed to be a warning sign of like, no, don't eat me, please. I taste bad. I'm going to be bad for you.
Yeah.
Which I think
right.
is really interesting. And I'd like to know more of like the psychology behind that.
Yeah. That's beyond my wheelhouse. So I'll leave that to
beyond mine
psychologists.
too.
No, I think you're right. That's really interesting. It's also kind of one of the things that I think it's interesting. Some of these compounds, right, they have very, a lot of, well, these negative for human sort of molecules have this bitter taste, but a lot of things that give certain vegetables and plants their flavor, right, are very similar compounds. Like if you ever have mustard or horseradish, right, and it's really spicy, those compounds are, I mean, they're not related necessarily to the caffeine or the opium, but they're also molecules that the plants are making as a, most of the time, all these chemicals are defense related, right? Telling someone not to eat them. But some of the things we actually find pleasure in, right? Like mustard or spicy things. Yeah. So I think that's interesting too.
It's really interesting. Yeah. Something that I think is really interesting, and I think could be another thing that we discuss as groups at our table, are how we kind of normalize addiction to certain substances like caffeine, but then we demonize addiction to other substances like marijuana or like opium or mescaline, like in the book. So why do you think that is? Why do we normalize addiction in some areas of our life, but we are against it in other areas of our lives? So feel free to take like another 10 minutes to discuss, then we'll come back and talk as a group. And we'll keep talking. Yeah.
No, it's a really good. I think that's a really good question.
That was something I was asking myself, like reading the whole book, like a lot of these, and we'll talk about this later too, like a lot of these plants have such like cultural significance and like not really are abused, but are really important in like lives of certain people.
Yeah.
But we're like, no, that's bad. You
Right.
can't consume that. But
Right.
then caffeine, which is also not great for us, we're like, yes, that's
Right.
good. Why aren't you drinking coffee? You
Right.
don't drink coffee? What's wrong with you? You know?
Yeah, no. I think, yeah. No, I think that's a really good point. It is interesting how, as a society, we've kind of made I guess as a very sort of like Western society, right? We've decided that certain people should or shouldn't have access to certain plants derived molecules, right? And then some of them are good, some of them are bad. I don't know. I don't know. My first reaction to kind of this question is like, why would we demonize one and celebrate the other? Is related a little bit to
Like, kind of talking about like how you were saying earlier, I can't believe growing certain plants is illegal.
Yeah, right. Yeah, I don't know, but my first reaction in my mind is sort of like, well, one of them has more serious effects than the other. But like if I think about that a little further, I'm not sure that that's really true.
For
like,
some, yes.
right. Well, and kind of to
But not
what he was talking about in the book with his caffeine experiment, right? There are some very
That had
serious
the worst
consequences
effects of him going off of it.
Exactly, right. And then there are some actually like with certain psychoactives, right? There are some really beneficial things that happen when people take those. So I don't know. I'm not really sure. I think actually kind of an interesting example of this too, that I think it's interesting too that it doesn't get talked about as much anymore, but nicotine, right? Was this plant-derived substance, right? You know, that had far-reaching implications for the economy, and then the history of this country, right? With the slave trade, like that was something, right? That for a very, very long time was sort of celebrated, right? It wasn't.
It was
taboo
so
to
normalized.
be-
Yeah,
it wasn't
everybody
taboo to be
smoked.
addicted to
They're giving
caffeine.
cigarettes to kids.
Absolutely.
Like,
Well, and even before that, right? Like people had pipe tobacco.
Yeah.
And, we're smoking that way.
growing tobacco was like one of the first major crops grown in the United
Absolutely.
States by
A
settlers.
huge economic boon
Yeah.
from that, and then right as we kind of learn more about like the health effects of nicotine,
Kind
right?
of like started to cut it out
started
a little
to say,
bit.
oh, that's maybe not so cool, but
And we
I
we
know.
can see this happening in real time right now too. I think with alcohol,
yeah,
where
right.
it, at least, I mean, this is all anecdotal, but it seems like a lot more people like our age are not drinking as
Right.
much, or like we're not drinking as much as our parents, and people
Right.
are becoming more aware of the negative effects of
Yeah.
alcohol on the body.
Right. Yeah. So I think there's just a lot of interesting sociological, political, historical context, right, to a lot of these things that just isn't. I don't know, that shifts and changes over time. Yeah, I don't know.
I think, and he touches upon this in the book, but I think probably the main reason that addiction to caffeine is so normalized is purely from a productivity and
Oh,
capitalistic
that's true. Yeah,
standpoint.
right.
Because
Right.
he touches on in the book how, like I think in England, they used to give workers alcohol on the job, and so they were just drinking all
Oh my
day.
gosh. Yeah,
So
right, right.
productivity wasn't great, and they were drunk. They probably weren't functioning at a super high
Right.
level.
Right.
But then once the West was able to start growing and like cultivating their own coffee beans, and coffee and tea were much more accessible, and they didn't only have to like trade to get it.
Mhm.
They started providing workers with coffee, and productivity went through the roof.
Right.
And so they stopped providing with alcohol and started providing
Sure.
coffee instead. And I think that's probably still why, like, at least here in America, why coffee has such a hold on us, because it helps us be good at our jobs.
Right. Yeah. Right.
It's what the employers want.
Right. And we want to be, well, and I think even more than like employers wanting it now, there's just like this culture of like productivity and like, well, I guess girl boss era is kind of over a little bit, but like there was this era, right, of like just being super productive, having side hustles and being your own boss and getting so many things done that I think the like saying you are addicted to caffeine was a big part of that.
And we're seeing now like so many of these like crazy drinks coming out when it comes to caffeine, like
right.
the Panera lemonade or all of these like new energy drinks. I think, but I've never had one, but Four Loko was like caffeine combined with alcohol,
Yeah,
right?
terrible idea.
Or like
right.
Red Bull, vodka Red Bulls, and like it's like integrating itself more into like society now beyond just a productivity thing, but also the productivity thing is getting worse. Like I know so many people who take caffeine pills, so many PhD students that take caffeine pills. Yeah.
Wow. I mean, I'm not surprised. I shouldn't be surprised about that. And I just drank a whole lot of coffee while I was in grad school, but yeah.
And like it's coffee is like one of those things that we're probably not supposed to drink because it doesn't, at least the first couple times you try it, doesn't taste good.
Oh, it's terrible.
I don't really like coffee, and I probably would never drink it, but I started to drink coffee socially with my friends who needed it. They would want to go to Starbucks or something, and I'd go with them for like the experience.
Sure, yeah.
And you got to buy something.
Yeah.
And now I've found that I've done that so much, I'm starting to like coffee.
Oh no.
And I'm like,
it's a slippery slope.
No. Yeah. I'm curious, do you know anything about, this might be way out of your wheelhouse too. I've heard that like for people with certain I'm trying to think of the right way to phrase it. Okay, I have ADHD.
Yeah, no, you're fine.
And I've been told that like people with ADHD often need a lot more of certain substances like caffeine in order for it to have any effect on them because of something with our neurotransmitters being messed up. Do you know anything about that?
I don't know a lot about like the science of that, but I don't think that would surprise me because I think, again, in my very non-expert opinion, non-medical expert opinion, I think a lot of ADHD is very similar to other kind of atypical neurodivergent kind of, I hesitate to call them disorders, right? But like neurodivergent experiences that are stimulation seeking, right? Like even people like on the autism spectrum, a lot of their behaviors are related to seeking stimulation from like, physical touch or, like thumb sucking, things like that. And I think caffeine is I could imagine a scenario in which caffeine is just another kind of like a chemical stimulant as opposed to like a physical stimulant or something like that. So I wouldn't be surprised if those things are related, but like definitely not within my my wheelhouse, but I wouldn't be surprised. So
I'm gonna read these again.
Yeah, no, you're fine.
And I think we'll probably talk about the capitalism thing with everybody.
Yeah, I think that would be a good question.
Mhm.
Yeah, to ask everyone.
And then transition into the mescaline. I don't have a discussion question for that.
That's okay.
But like I think for that I mainly want to talk about like the importance of plants in religion and
Oh, yeah.
culture, and then also like how in the book he talks about how these like the peyote cactus is so important to the native
Mhm.
people
Mhm.
in that area,
Right.
and they don't really like outsiders consuming it.
Right.
But then he was like, I'm gonna do it anyways.
Yeah,
You know?
yeah, exactly.
It kind of felt like a slap in the face a
Right.
little bit. Like,
Yeah.
how can you talk about the reverence these cultures have for these plants and that they want to conserve it for themselves, especially because the cactus is dying off? And he's
Right.
like, well, I deserve to.
I'm writing a book about it.
Okay.
No, I think that's a really good point.
Okay.
Yeah,
Yeah, whenever you're
probably,
ready.
Yeah.
No rush. It gives us more time to sip our drinks.
That's true. This one is really good.
Which one did you get?
The Bloomsbury.
I've heard that one's really good. Yeah.
Oh, I think we're live again.
All right. Is everybody ready to come back and discuss as a group? Right. Again, if you'd like to share what you talked about at your table, please just raise your hand. Allison will come over to you with the microphone.
So we talked about how it's a lot of it's about money. A lot of it's about money. And also about what we're internationally known at this time. So like, for example, in the Quran, alcohol is not allowed. In the Mormon church, if you're just kind of Googling, you're not allowed to have alcohol and also hot drinks.
Yeah.
So apparently, according to the thing that Mormons can have sodas, but not coffee and tea. But then we thought, well, this is the 19th century. Perhaps when they wrote no hot drinks, they meant no mulled wine and no coffee and tea. And then what does that mean? Because they didn't know about, there was no manufactured soft drinks.
Yeah.
That's a good point.
Yeah, so one thing that was kind of fascinating about caffeine is, the reason why I think a lot of like caffeine is put to so many things is that it keeps us away from making more productive.
Mhm.
Corporations like us to be productive, make more money, like, things there. So like something like that comparatively to like weed or alcohol, the Dow Jones and also impairs and like certain things, but like probably don't want to be as chill like.
But
Oh, yeah.
You mentioned marijuana. I think right now, especially marijuana, is a huge discussion and politically and socially. And so I'd love to know your thoughts on maybe beyond addiction, we're talking about caffeine, but your thoughts on marijuana. And, you mentioned that like a plant is a plant. It is
Right.
many of the things it makes for itself. We just figured out that there's stuff to us too. That's kind of cool. What are your thoughts on like, I guess like, if you have any thoughts on like you mentioned you have some, like you talked about your thoughts on like poppy.
Mhm.
I guess maybe does that translate to marijuana? Do you feel like it's maybe a little more nuanced, because it's more popular? Like,
I think I don't know. I'm sort of the mindset. I think especially with all of these plants, one thing that I don't know, this is probably because I have a science background, but I would like to learn more about them. Actually in Canada, and I think there's a few in the US too, but there are institutes popping up that are specifically researching cannabis, right? Cannabinoid products. Because I think I'm going to misquote this, or I'm going to say this incorrectly, I think, but I think in Canada it's easier to study, so that maybe is why there's more institutes there. But I think we have a lot to learn from these plants because they're making a lot of interesting molecules. I mean, the fact that poppies can make morphine is kind of wild, right? And so I don't know. I think I'm sort of the mindset that we should be able to grow them. I don't know. I think with marijuana, it's a little bit different because people are growing it as like a crop, or people tend to kind of grow it more as like cash crops, right? And so I don't know. I am probably naively like in favor of it being legalized. I think a lot of states have realized too that they can make a lot of money from the taxes on selling those products. And I think it's probably only a matter of time until it's legal in more places. But I think there's a lot of, especially with marijuana and other plants that make cannabinoids, there's a lot of medicinal reasons to study and potentially grow and use more cannabinoid related molecules. They have, I mean, we produce, right, our own brains produce cannabinoid related molecules that have effects on mood and things like that, which is why you get high from taking THC, right? Or it has effects on your brain. And so I think there's a lot that we can learn from them. So I am definitely in favor of us studying these things more so that we can understand more about their potential uses and also what that means about us and kind of the molecules themselves. Right.
Inhibiting exploration of what the potential for these plants are.
Right.
They're associated with like certain stereotypes.
Mm-hmm.
Inhibited with like what considers.
Right.
Today they just announced their rescheduling marijuana.
Oh, really?
It was announced literally today, right?
Oh, what did they change it to? Anyone know? Oh, okay. Okay.
It's a reference, I'd say, it's suggestion.
Oh, okay. Oh, interesting. Okay. To reclassify. Yeah. No, that's interesting. Yeah.
And-
Oh. Oh, yeah. Great. Yep. Yeah. I think, and it's legal in Michigan and Ohio too, I think,
Yeah,
right?
we're
So we're sort of
surrounded now.
surrounded. So I feel like especially we're losing even more money. That's an economic take on it, but right, we're losing a lot of those tax dollars to our neighboring states. So, yeah. Yeah. I do think one thing that's really interesting though about the conversations around marijuana and THC, I mean, people are creative, right? And I think it's interesting that, and it's kind of part of this bigger discussion about what plants are or what molecules and addictions are we demonizing, or I keep saying that word, but are we demonizing versus like celebrating? And I think it's interesting that while THC is still illegal in a lot of places, we're very creative with all the other varieties of this molecule,
Yeah.
right? Where you just tweak a double bond or something like that, and suddenly it's legal, even though it has a very similar effect. So like delta 8, right, is not that different than THC chemically. And I forget what, I'm going to sound real old, but there's like dab bars in the city and I know it's related, but I forget exactly which molecule that is, right? But those things are legal, but THC is technically not. And like kratom or whatever is legal, but other things are not. So I don't understand why just changing one part of the molecule also makes it better. Yeah. Oh, 100%. Exactly. Exactly. It's exactly what happened.
Something that Michael touched upon in the book very briefly, like in regards to the war on drugs, was like part of like the criminalization of marijuana being like the government going after kind of like Black people living in the United States who were tending to use it more, and hippies who were against like the anti-war movement as a way to kind of get their leaders in jail.
Right.
But yeah, now it's become, with what you were talking about with all the different molecules and stuff, like kind of skirting around the law. It's no different. It's not dangerous.
Yeah.
But still criminalized.
Right. Yeah.
Because they had these thoughts like
Many
way
years
back.
ago.
Yeah.
Right. No, it is. It's interesting.
But I think this might be a good pivot into kind of the third section of the book, which is about mescaline. And he talked a lot about the peyote cactus and the importance of this cactus to Native American people living out west, and how this plant is used in a lot of like rituals and like healing practices for those people. And I was wondering if you could touch on a little bit kind of the importance of plants in different cultures and religions and like healing practices for them.
Yeah, I think probably the thing I will do first and foremost, since I'm not an expert in those sort of topics, is to guide you to another book. Braiding Sweetgrass is another book that I think if you, yes, we'll have some snaps for braid. Did you do that for a book club here? Oh, great. Okay. So maybe people have some familiarity with that. But Braiding Sweetgrass is an excellent, I think, dive into cultural significance of plants and what they mean for different communities, right? And how that book especially about how knowledge can be gathered from plants and what different types of knowledge mean, and which ones are considered useful and which ones are not. So I'll say that first as my kind of disclaimer. But I think, I don't know, it sort of comes back to this idea, right, that certain plants are okay, certain plants are not okay. Certain people have I think what's particularly interesting about that sort of conversation or that idea, the fact that we've demonized this plant and told I keep saying that word, I'm so sorry, but the fact that
That's kind of what we've done.
I know, but we've said like even though you've been using this plant in a specific way for hundreds of years, maybe even longer, right? We don't agree with that. Therefore, nobody should use it. It's going to be illegal. It is interesting, but I think it's sort of funny too how that happened, right? But we sort of had this full circle moment where now people can spend lots of money and go on retreats where they can, take these substances and have these kind of religious-esque experiences. Yeah. So I don't know. It's sort of, I think also that particular part comes back to money. I think someone else said that, why, some plants are celebrated and versus not, is related to that too.
A big part of the third section of this book, and something that I kind of looked at a little bit sideways when he was writing about it, was he was talking about the reverence that a lot of Native people have for the peyote cactus, how the cactus itself is becoming really hard to find. It's kind of being like over-consumed, so it's becoming endangered. And a lot of Native people would like if it was kept only for them to be able to use, and that if we white people stopped taking their cactus from them. And he was talking about this in great detail, and then he was like, well, I'm still going to eat it anyways. And I thought that was just kind of like, okay, so you just talked a lot about how important this plant is to a certain group of people and how they really wish that you wouldn't consume it.
Right.
But you're still going to do it anyways. I wonder if you could talk about that a little bit.
Yeah. I think there was definitely, I don't know, I could sort of go back and forth on that because on the one hand, I don't know, I have been talking about, I'm sort of having these thoughts in real time, so bear with me. But it's interesting to think or to say, I don't know, the flip side of some of my arguments I was making earlier about people being able to grow whatever plants they want and kind of use them. The flip side of that is should only a certain Native American tribe, right, have the ability to use this plant? And again, the cultural significance, the religious significance for them is very different than it is, I think, for other people. So I don't know, it's a difficult question because in some ways, right, we're sort of saying that again, plants should be grown and cultivated regardless, but I don't know, that's sort of a different circumstance. Sorry. So I'm sort of arguing against myself, I guess, in a way by saying that. But I understand, I think it is kind of confusing that he did that in the book after spending so much time, like, kind of railing against that. But on the other hand, I sort of understand from writing the book's perspective, if he didn't have that experience,
Yeah,
and wasn't
it'd be
able
less
to
to
really
talk
talk about
about,
it, right?
yeah.
I don't know if it would be as interesting to readers.
He did say that he contemplated writing about psilocybin. Is that how you say it?
Mhm, yeah.
And MDMA.
Yeah.
But he thought that would be boring.
I think he did write a subsequent book about
Another one.
psilocybin, if I'm remembering correctly.
I
So I
have
think that's
no
interesting
idea.
too. I don't think I made that up. Someone Google that for me. Allison, Google that.
You on it?
Thank you.
Okay. But so mescaline is a hallucinogen. Would you be able to tell us more kind of about like hallucinogenic plants?
That's a little bit outside of my comfort zone, but yeah, I'm not sure I can really tell you a whole lot about that. I'm sorry.
Oh no, that is totally fine.
Oh, sorry. Oh, see? Oh, I was right. How to change your mind. Yeah. Okay. I was right. Thank you. So that's, I think that one came out after this book. So I think that's interesting. Yeah. Yeah.
I was wondering, since we like kind of talked about earlier, about him as an author in general, if you had any more thoughts on him, like after reading this book, like has your opinion on him changed at all, or?
I would say not necessarily. Sort of. Don't get me wrong. I think his books are really interesting. I think that there's a lot of information. There's a lot of things we can learn, and they are very thought provoking in the sense that I think he's posing great questions, right, and things to consider about our relationship with plants. But in all of his, and I think Omnivore's Dilemma was probably my favorite of his books. Yeah, and I became not because of that book, because of a lot of other things too, but was a vegetarian for a very long time, kind of because of that book. But I think some of his kind of musings on these topics are just slightly misguided. If he just maybe interviewed a couple more plant scientists, I'd be a little happier. But they're interesting, they're thought provoking, and that's the point of them, is to get people to think about some of these topics and their relationship with the plants and the things we are. I mean, the reality of the situation is, right, we do get a lot of products from plants. We use plants in so many different ways. I think it's naive to think that the way people encounter plants is through using them. So I think it'd be naive to think that people are not right. That people are, what am I trying to say? That people are unaware of that fact.
So if there is anything that you could add to this book, what would you want to add to it?
I think, that's a really good question. I think it would have been interesting to know a little bit more, maybe about why the plants make some of these molecules, right? Maybe have a little bit of a deeper dive into
more of the evolution on the plants.
Right. Yes, these plants produce these molecules that we've cultivated for a variety of interesting purposes in our lives, and that have honestly changed human history in pretty massive ways. But what were they doing for the plant? Why do they exist there in the first place? Is there anything interesting that we can learn from that, and think about our relationship with that instead?
I think that'd be a really good addition to the book too, especially since he talks so much about like the effect that these plants had on him. If we as readers had a better understanding of why the plants make the molecules that they do, what's the evolutionary advantage to the plants, it might help us better understand why the plants are impacting us the way that we do when they consume them.
Right.
And kind of adding a stronger scientific arm to the book.
Yeah.
I think that'd be a great
with
addition too.
Yeah.
Before we open up for questions from everyone, is there anything else that you would like to touch upon?
About anything in particular, or just kind of like
anything you want?
I mean, I could go in many directions. No, I mean, I think I kind of have said a few things. I think the thing that misses the mark for me about Michael Pollan's books is just a lack of maybe reverence for the plants themselves and these incredible things that they're doing. And so I think, yeah, I could talk about that ad nauseum, but if anyone has questions about that or anything specific why I think that, I would be happy to answer.
Does anybody have any questions on that or anything else about the book or anything that we've talked about today? Mhm.
Sure.
I think it's interesting that obviously he's focused on like the
Mm-hmm.
Am I wrong in assuming that's a minority of plants? And so, like, I think
Oh.
volume-wise, with like agriculture, like food, that also has an effect on your brain, right?
Oh, sure, absolutely. I mean, I think, yeah. I see what you're saying. Yeah, I think you are correct in thinking that. I think it's interesting that the title of this book is right. Your mind on plants.
Yeah.
And I understand why he's using that phrase, right? Because these are drugs that have an effect on your brain. But I would argue that your life on plants is very different and includes a lot of ways that we use plants. I mean, every single day your life is impacted by a plant, whether or not you are thinking about it. I used to tell my students all the time, like, thank your plants today because you either ate them, right? You're wearing them. Your fuel might have some plant-derived. You might have some plant-derived fuels in your car, right? If you have ethanol produced from corn. And right, the economy of wherever you're living is probably somewhat based on plants and commodities. So, you have a lot of other things to thank plants for, I think, besides the psychoactive parts of their existence. So even if you're a meat eater, the meat that you ate was fed by the corn that was grown down the street. So.
Yeah, before I read the book too, I also thought it was going to be much more about like plants that are more in your everyday life
Right.
impacting you. Like I thought he was going to talk about sugar and the impact of
sugar
sugar
cane
on
is a big one, too.
psychology
Yeah.
or like smells.
Ooh,
Like I think there's so many cool ways he could have
Yes.
gone instead of
Yes.
just focusing basically on drugs.
100%. I agree with that. 100%. And those aren't even the most interesting chemicals either, I would argue, that plants make. So it's a hot take. What are? Oh, now you put me on the spot. My top 3 like chemicals that plants make. I don't know. I can't get over it. It's probably because I really like consuming these, but I love glucosinolates. Those are the mustard. Like I was talking about mustard earlier, right? The bittery spiciness of mustard and related brassicas, right? Your broccoli, your cauliflower, your kale. I love those molecules. Oh man, what else? I don't know. Sugar's a pretty good one too. It's pretty central for all of
For life.
our life. not just for the plant, but I mean humans, right? Like or all animals, really. If we didn't have the sugars from the plants, we would also not exist, probably. So, I don't know. Those are 2. That's good. Oh, sorry.
So you both kind of talked about this a little bit throughout the conversation tonight, but I was just kind of curious since you both do science work and science communication work in some form or fashion, how do you think the field of science communication needs to evolve or take a next step to like make conversations about plants and how they affect our minds, if that makes sense, to improve the
Would you mind if I jump in with something really quick? I went to a whole workshop about this once, actually. There is this movement, kind of group of plant scientists that are pushing for this. Specifically, the workshop I went to was about how to increase this in undergraduate classrooms, because at the time I was teaching undergraduate students. But there's this concept that is called plant awareness disparity, right? So the concept of plant awareness is sort of like if you are shown a picture, like if you just look around the room right now, and everyone can do this, and you look at what's in this room, and you were to describe this to someone, would you include the plants that are around here or not? Or if you were to look at a picture and describe what was in, I think the classic example is there's like this picture of that includes animals. It's like a forest scene, and you ask someone like, "Oh, what's this a picture of?" They'll tell you they're animals. They'll recount all the animals in the picture, but they won't tell you about the plants that are there. And so it's kind of this plant awareness and plant awareness disparity is this kind of this idea that in our everyday lives, as we're going about our activities, right, we are aware of many things. Right? We're taking in all sorts of information, but we're generally not taking in information about the plants in our environment. And kind of the idea was to try and flip that switch a little bit and have people or kind of help encourage people to notice plants a little bit more, because maybe if you're noticing them in your life every day, you're going to start to pay attention to the importance of them as well. And so I think, that hasn't necessarily gotten a lot of traction internationally. But it's something I know that people are trying really, really hard to encourage in the classroom. And hopefully maybe that has a little bit of an effect outside the classroom. So.
That's really cool.
Yeah. Yeah.
So I was just gonna ask a kind of open-ended question. If there was like one plant fact or one thing that you like just feel like, oh my goodness, if you just knew this about plants, then you just freak out. This is so cool.
Yeah.
Like, what is your plant fact?
I've got it locked and loaded. I spoiled it a little bit because I said it earlier, but I think my favorite plant fact, and the thing I tell people more than anything else about plants, whether or not they want to know, is that plants have an immune system. And we can talk about that more. I mean, I could talk, that was what my dissertation was on, so I could talk a lot about it. But plants are not only are they good at adapting to environmental conditions, right? They grow towards light. Their roots grow down into the soil. They respond to pathogens, right? They create a lot of these types of molecules to deter pests. But plants can actually be infected by bacteria and viruses just like humans and other animals. And they have to be able to survive that, right? They don't have an adaptive immune system that produces antibody, right? It's not gonna go kill those insects, but they have to survive. And so they do that actually by sacrificing parts of them. They kill off parts of themselves. It's called programmed cell death, right? They will kill a part of their leaf if it's infected with bacteria so that the rest of the plant survives, right? And they have these just really, I don't know, I think they're pretty beautifully complex systems and pathways that let them respond to pathogens in that way. And I wish people cared about it more, because as two Florida natives, right, you probably know that citrus cannot be grown in Florida anymore because there's a devastating citrus pathogen called, citrus greening. Yeah, that's the disease that's caused by the bacteria Candidatus liberibacter, I think. And it is truly devastating. It's like it's demolished the citrus crop or citrus groves in Florida, so you can't really grow citrus there anymore. There is a banana, if anyone likes eating bananas in this room, right? There's the Cavendish banana became susceptible to this fungus. Now you can't grow those anymore. So we had to engineer a new banana that is resistant to that fungus. So if you like eating food, you should care that plants have an immune system. And the other, well, this is a bit of a soapbox moment, so again, but it's an extension of this conversation. If you care about the future of food, but if you care about the future of the climate, please buy genetically modified food. If I have one tip for you, it is to not buy non-GMO produce. Do not make a market for that, because we would not have bananas, right, if we didn't engineer a better banana. It's not bad for you. It's not scary. It's not Frankenfood. Clearly, I'm passionate about this. But it is it is important that you continue or that you buy genetically modified food and that you continue to buy and that you advocate for that. Because if we don't have genetically modified food in the next 50 years, 50 to 100 years, we will not have food. So. Okay. Sure. Yes. 100%. Yeah, absolutely.
So I have a question. You said you had plants.
Me? Oh, yes, I do. Yes, we have pitcher plants. Oh, that's an excellent question. Someone bought them off the internet and sent them to me. So I can't tell you. I can find out though and tell Allison to tell you if you want them. But we have some beautiful pitcher. Honestly, pitcher plants are. I should have said pitcher plants is my favorite plant because now that I'm thinking about it, they're probably one of my favorite ones. I don't know if anyone's familiar with pitcher plants, but they have this really cool little pitcher structure that has like like an acid in it that when bugs fly into it or they crawl down into it, they die. And then the plant digests it and it takes in the nutrients. But those ones are really cool, and you can find them out in the wild a lot. Like they're anywhere that's kind of boggy, you'll probably find pitcher plants. So, sorry, that was not an answer to your question. But you can buy them on the internet, and they actually came pretty healthy to us. And we subsequently killed some of them just because they're hard to take care of. The pitcher plants survived though. Sorry. Excellent. That sounds like a personal problem.
All right. Well, I want to thank you so much for coming and talking with us today. I had a great
Thank you for
time.
having me. This was really fun.
I learned a lot from you.
Excellent.
And very appreciative for everything that you've said with us today.
Of course. Yeah, thank you for having me. This was fun.
I just want to thank you, Liz, for coming in and moderating this, and thank you, Karina, for being my plant club. Please join us at the end of last Tuesday of May. We're going to be reading Unmasking AI with a returning guest who, if you don't remember who he is, you will remember him. He scares the absolute Jesus out of you talking about him.
no.
Because I think last time all of us left a little starstruck, although he, a little shell-shocked maybe is the word, although I think he will tell some of your fears maybe.
Okay.
We'll talk about, we'll go a little deeper. The last time we talked about AI, it was a little bit of an overview, very surface level, how we were kind of, what is AI, how does it work, what's the basic principles. Now we're going to get a little deeper into how it's applied, and maybe how it's not applied in a way that is actually equitable, and may actually be doing us more harm than good. We might be building bad tools with the way that we're building AI. I don't want to spoil too much, but this goes into a lot better detail than our guests is going to be incredible. If you join us in the May, if you participated in the City Nature Challenge, everyone do a big shout out. We've had over 5,000 observations in the holidays.
Wow.
270 people, 5,000 observations, 4 days, across the state of Indiana.
Wow.
This is Citizen Science Network, and actually it's not something you have to do only in 4 days. This is that be an stuff for this one. I will be logging all of the things my new members. I'm so excited.
Like all your plants.
I actually learned so much about plants in my backyard that I've questioned for so long.
Excellent.
It'll help you identify them. So if you have a plant in your backyard, you want to know what's going to like kill you if you touch it. I have to listen to it.